Welcome to the Millionaire Next Door podcast with Robert Curtiss, CFP accredited investment fiduciary from Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. In this podcast, we help successful wealth accumulators like you looking to transition to a work-optional lifestyle by helping you build strategies for growing and maintaining your wealth. Robert draws from years of experience and fiduciary responsibility and interviews guest experts to help you build reliable strategies to grow and maintain your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millionaire Next Door podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. Today, I have a guest, an incredibly interesting guest, someone I met a few years back. I couldn't resist having her on the program. It's a little different than what we normally do, but I think it'll just be perfect and timely. She's Kristen Ulmer. She's a thought leader, master facilitator, and fear and anxiety expert who radically challenges existing norms around the subject of this deeply misunderstood emotion. Her education on this subject came from practical real-world experience, starting with being a mogul specialist on the U.S. ski team. Kristen then became more notoriously recognized as being the best female big mountain extreme skier in the world, a status she kept for 12 years. So that's pretty awesome, Kristen. We did a little bit of work together in fear. I just want to launch in. How would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you do? I think it'll be a real gift for folks to hear this and have you as a resource. We'll put your contact in the show notes, but please launch into it.
Well, I used to be a professional athlete. I retired in 2003, and now I'm a thought leader very specifically on fear and anxiety and what to do about it. But I'm not coming from a place of subscribing to traditional norms on what to do about fear and anxiety because of my unique education and background. You know, what I learned to do about fear, what does extreme mean? Extreme means that I used to risk my life for a living. I would ski terrain where the consequences of failure were either injury or death. And I would do that on a daily basis for over 12 years. So seemingly I knew a thing or two about what to do about fear. And its cousin, anxiety. Nobody's calling it fear anymore. Everybody's calling it anxiety. And what I learned is a couple of things. First of all, what we're taught to do about fear and anxiety is wrong. And that the actual secret to having a healthy relationship with fear and anxiety is the opposite of what you're taught, which is what extreme athletes do that we don't even know that we're doing. Like if you were to talk to any danger sports athlete in the world that risked their lives for a living in the mountains or on the waves, they wouldn't be able to tell you what the magic is. They don't know the secret. But I've spent my life since retiring figuring that out, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Wow. Yeah. What is it? What makes them view it? Or what are well, I guess that's what we're going to talk about, but that's so interesting. It strikes me too, some of these folks, you talk about traditional norms, but they may be dealing with going off an extreme mountain or, surfing a 100-foot wave, right, in Nazaré, Portugal. They may be comfortable in that environment. Maybe they're uncomfortable in some other environment. So, but yeah, keep going. And you got me. I'm dying to know what it is. I don't know why fear comes up in different points in life. I just wanted to have a healthy relationship with it. But I don't know what I was taught over the years, but I never even thought about it. I just wanted to avoid it, but it's a real thing and you got to confront it. So,
well, by the end of this conversation, the goal is not for everybody to go jump off cliffs for a living or surf Mavericks.
Thank you. Yeah,
right?
We don't endorse that.
No, that's not where we're going.
Not encouraging.
The goal is for people to better understand their relationship with fear, because their relationship with fear will shape pretty much every aspect of their personality and really dictate their choices, and will also, based on the subject at hand, right, determine whether or not they become a millionaire or not. And I assume by being on this podcast, it has to be assumed that I'm a millionaire. Yes, I am. I'm a self-made millionaire. I was in a sport that was not a high-paying sport. And just to what you were just saying, like, yes, seemingly I was fearless in the mountains, but giving up a speech in front of a room, definitely not. Sometimes I have social anxiety. I have a mixed relationship with fear. Like, what I did regarding fear in the mountains is different than what I do regarding fear when I'm dating or when I'm giving a speech or when I'm making an investment or what have you. It's not just one relationship that we have with fear. It's usually more of a paradox. Like we may be having a super healthy relationship with fear at work, but a really unhealthy relationship with fear in our personal relationships or in our investments. And it's really starts with identifying what our relationships are with fear. How do we deal with it? How do we view it? And I'll just kind of bait you a little bit. Are we in flow with it, or are we in resistance to it, or everything in between?
Yeah. And I would think a big part is just becoming aware of it, just living with you, just being aware of that in the first place. And then maybe having a process. What if you are straight in the middle? What are some modalities? Maybe you breathe, maybe, how do you focus? But keep going. It's just fascinating to me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll start at the beginning. What is fear? A lot of people think of fear as being scared or afraid. And that's not what it is. It's very rare that fear presents itself as scared or afraid. So I'll back up even further. So we have this amygdala, which is a part of our brains. It's two almond-shaped nuggets at the top of our spine. It's the oldest part of the brain and the wisest, and it's the manufacturing plant for fear. So we have 11 million bits of data coming into our system every second. I mean, how the scientists figure this out, I have no idea. But 11 million bits of data per second is first run through this primary filter. And it's so fast. The amygdala is not a thought-producing part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Just in an instant, it'll determine if there's a threat. And if there is a threat, it'll produce fear, which is just an uncomfortable sensation. And it's supposed to, it gets sent as a shot into our bodies, and it's supposed to flow like water through a hose and provide for us on-point, intuitive fight, flight, or freeze action in that moment. And then 10 to 90 seconds later, it's just gone out of our system. So long as we're in flow with it, that is. And it's the perfect design. There's nothing wrong with it that we have this. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. It's especially in today's fast-moving world where more happens in 24 minutes than used to happen in 24 years practically, right?
Right.
Fear is with us every single moment of every single day in pretty much every interaction we have, no exceptions from birth till death in every single one of us. And that's a big, bold statement. But if we're honest with ourselves, we can see that it's there. We always have some kind of general sense of discomfort. That's our fear. Now, when I say fear, I'm not talking about scared or afraid. We're not scared or afraid our whole lives. We just are sometimes in a heightened sense of awareness. We're just kind of paying attention. It's always just there. And I don't mean fears with an S, like of something specific that we can identify that's tangible, like fear of failure or fear of success, even fear of getting injured. It's just a general sense of discomfort that's here all the time. And we like to think that us humans are all about love, and we are, but we're also all about fear. And most people are in denial of this reality. And the way that we handle this discomfort that's here pretty much all the time really is what I'm saying shapes our personalities and our choices. Most people ignore it. Most people are in denial of it. I ignored it during my ski career. That's one thing that I did while skiing. I don't recommend it. Some people go numb. Some people check out. Some people are so in their heads that they don't have to feel it. Some people are trying to understand it all the time, and they're also in their heads. We come up with coping mechanisms. There's a million of them. We try to fight it. We try to rationalize it away. We try to control it and then become a really controlling person. We try to replace it with calm. So we're going to therapists to try and get rid of it. Many people avoid it. Like they don't do anything to warrant more fear. The fear comes from just regular everyday life. The fear comes from traumas that we go through. And a trauma could be getting raped or mugged or a cancer diagnosis. It could also just be making an investment or that goes south or what have you, or divorce, or kid is sick or something. So that's trauma that brings in more fear. And then there's also choices to do bigger things with our lives. become a millionaire, make investments, take chances, jump off cliffs for a living, give speeches, start a podcast. There's going to be even more fear. And then there's just cosmic, fear that comes into our bodies that we can't even grasp, like fear that is in plants and animals and the rivers and just all around us, that's kind of in our bodies that we would never be able to understand the concept of. And then just fears with us on a cellular basis, like this first single cell amoeba that ever lived would move away from fire in order to save itself. It has no spine, no arms or legs, no brain, but that's like where fear comes from. So fear is even in us on a cellular level. So we had better have a good relationship with it. And like I just outlined, most of us don't.
Yeah, it's interesting. You made me there's so many things. I deal with it in financial markets, but in life too. So we're not just dealing with people's money or them grow, the behavioral finance aspect of it. Like people, if you lose 10% versus gaining 10 or up 20, the feeling in the brain, the neurology or what kicks in is so much stronger, that fear of loss, the behavioral finance, or once I lost this or this happened. So how it clouds the future when the future or present day things are really independent of that. And interestingly, and you may find this interesting, you may know this, there's what's called a fear measure in the market, in the stock market. There's a thing called the VIX. You ever heard of the VIX? It's just, you can look it up on your phone. It's measuring the volatility and the movement. We're at extreme low measures. But, I've lived through, when they flew the planes into the World Trade Center, okay? The 2008, you just saw these giant spikes. March of, what was it, the 2020 or the COVID year, just this giant spike for a month. So at any rate, back to you. But those are things I see when people make decisions, and people really vary all over the spectrum with, my favorite, I've got a guy, he's 103 now, but he's a little more challenged physically, but up to about 102. And he did exceptionally well. This guy, multimillionaire, would run into a building to salvage something that was worth $20 without any fear. That's just how he lived his life. It was awesome, but he was on the extreme side. But back to you. These are just things that come across and trying to connect these two, but keep going, Kristen, please.
Let me reframe the guy that runs into the burning building to save the $20 thing. He's not fearless. So courage is a willingness to feel fear. Moment, he's willing to feel fear. And the fear is actually what makes him a super athlete in that moment and helps him keep alive. And like, if you think about walking across hot coals, for example, the fear lubricates the bottom of your feet with oil, which protects your feet. So these facilitators that facilitate people into being fearless to walk across the rocks, they're dangerous. People go to the hospital because, you're getting rid of
heard that.
Right? Like, so when he runs in the building, he's willing to feel fear. And second of all, fear is the thing that helps him run faster than he ever has and bring his A game, the fight, bring your A game to the thing that matters most. So he's not fearless at all, quite the contrary. And so that right there is the key between fear. Actually, fear doesn't hold anybody back from doing anything. It's our unwillingness to feel fear that holds us back. But fear is also an incredible source of wisdom. There's fear if you make the investment. There's fear if you don't make the investment. It's always there. There's fear if you ski the avalanche terrain, and there's fear if you don't ski it. Like, what does it mean about me if I don't ski this thing? I see myself as being a badass, right? And so that it doesn't matter what you do. There's never a moment that there is no fear, and fear's behind the scenes helping us make intuitive, lightning fast decisions. And the people who look fearless, they're not fearless. They're just willing to feel fear and maybe even enjoy feeling fear. I know I did. I was addicted to it. Like a heroin addict can be addicted to heroin, right? So
the dopamine, and the whole, the adrenaline, you nailed that guy exactly. I mean, I was just making an example, but I think you're right. He was comfortable feeling fear, uncomfortable, That's why he was so successful, but he enjoyed that. And he did like the fight. He's like a 5'2" Italian guy that was afraid of nothing. So he just really stood out with all the people I've worked with. Now there's, the term FOMO, right? You talk about fear of missing out, right? That can be a real thing if you don't participate. And oh my gosh. So, but keep going.
Have you heard of JOMO?
Yes, I have. Yeah, but
Joy
you can
of
share
missing
it. Yeah.
out.
I love it. I love it. It's how you frame these things, right? And your choices. But I love that one. Absolutely.
I mentioned that pretty much every aspect of somebody's personality is determined by their relationship with fear. If somebody's a big drinker, they're drinking to not have to deal with their fear. If somebody ignores fear or blocks it out, what do they have to become in order to be that way? Usually pretty arrogant, stoic, rigid, controlled, measured. People don't deal with their fear, but they make other people deal with their fear on their behalf. I was on the plane last night coming back from Mexico, and I sat next to this woman who was just like yelling at everyone. I didn't know this when I sat down next to her, and she was just furious with me for sitting next to her. It was a Southwest airline, so it was open seating. And, she seemed angry, but really what she was is somebody that was in a state of intense fear that didn't know how to deal with it, and was projecting it on other people, like a monkey throwing her shit on other people. People go numb. They don't really feel fully present on this earth because we just don't know how to deal with fear, and it's so painful for people. There's all these anxiety tics, or like people punching themselves in their face that have anxiety issues. That's because they hate fear so much that they hate themselves. If you have a belief that you shouldn't have fear, when you have it, which is pretty much all the time, you're going to think that there's something wrong with you. You're going to have a self-esteem issue. Yeah. If you're fighting fear in your own body, you're just going to be a really combative, angry person. You just start to see this everywhere. From my perspective, being a fear and anxiety expert, I meet somebody, I know immediately what their relationship is with fear. People that avoid fear, they don't take risks. They maybe never even leave the house. It's a way to have less fear. But the thing is, if there's going to be fear in your life, whether you never leave the house or whether you do leave the house, you're just going to have more fear, or a different kind of fear, if you don't leave the house, than the fear that if you're taking huge risks. So back to my skiing career, I took huge risks because I loved feeling fear. Now, I was willing to feel fear. I don't expect anybody to love feeling fear. It's uncomfortable, right? So let's just start with a willingness to feel fear. So what's going to make a difference for people in terms of their net worth, the risks that they take, which, of course, if you want to become a millionaire, you have to take risks, of course. And that is only going to happen if somebody is willing to feel fear. And so on some level, we may be willing to feel fear in one area of our lives, but not in another. The example of this would be somebody who is very wealthy, maybe a famous doctor, like taking risks in their career, but they just are crippled at the thought of falling in love and can't date, or they're just disintegrating as an athlete. Like I had a woman who was exactly this example, fearless at work, and she was an expert skier, but because she was not dealing with her fear at work, she was just becoming so rigid and stoic and blocking out fear to be, quote, fearless at work. The fear was showing up triply in her skiing, and she was just getting worse and worse. And she had digressed from a black diamond skier to barely being able to go down a groomed run. And she's like, what is wrong with me? I'm like, well, you're repressing fear at work, and so it's showing up triple in your skiing. So all this is a way of saying that whatever your relationship is with fear pretty much determines, like I said in the beginning, nearly every aspect of your personality and your choices. Do you see it?
You made me think of so many things. A lot of what we do when you say become a millionaire, it's the overnight 25-year success story. So a lot of it's calculated. So you're doing productive things that should mathematically, right? Einstein talked about time value of money being one of the greatest phenomenons he'd ever seen in the universe. So it's a little different. Yet there's some people who just don't take that first step. Like you talked about not going out of the house. They're just afraid. They never do it. So by not facing that fear or taking that step. They're just putting themselves right in the position for things not to go well. And you can see it. I deal with a lot of business owners too, who are, they might be afraid of things like markets or some of the things we deal with. And I've had to explain, you're in business for yourself. You got all kinds of risks, challenging market, litigation, employees. I mean, that's how, what we're doing is a more calculated thing. Or people who ask me about Bitcoin or crypto, and I'm like, you don't understand how much that thing moves. Like, I'm afraid of it. It's too, it could be down 10% on any given day. It typically is. That's too big of a, that's not what we're looking to do. You were taking the big risks and jumping off the giant thing. But we think over time, if you take measured things that are productive and make a lot of sense, and you have a team, and ultimately you'd want a team around you, right? If you were jumping off, you probably didn't have it. But now, if you had someone to say, I've skied this before, this is the descent, this is the right conditions, those are just things I think of out of the intersection. But please keep going. It just fascinates me, life, and people have different things they're afraid of. I love your comment about the repression, or it'll show up somewhere else.
So we've got to stop thinking about fear in terms of scared or afraid. You got to start thinking about fear in terms of intuition, because that's more how it shows up. It very rarely shows up as scared or afraid. That's an adjective. Fear is more of a noun, a resource that's flowing through our body like oxygen or blood. So I work with a lot of investors, like day traders hire me, poker players. For some reason, I have a lot of professional poker players that hire me, which is kind of the same thing, right? And you're talking about making decisions based on using our intellect, I'll call it. And if we're making all our decisions, like as a poker player or as a investor in a day trader, if we're making all of our decisions just based on our intellect and not based on our emotions or our intuition, aka our fear. People poo fear-based decision-making, but there's only fear-based decision-making. It's called our intuition. The best investors, the best poker players, they don't just base it on statistics or, using their intellect. They also base it on their intuition. And the Buddha calls it the middle way, where we're bridging the gap between that reasoning, rational mind and something more kind of gift from the universe. Some people would even call it cosmic. I call it intuition. It's the middle way between those two that makes people the best poker players.
Give me an example, someone intuiting, let's say they're an expert poker player, right? So that's why they're showing up and betting those stakes. But there's other experts at the table as well. I forget the other example you gave. Oh, well, a day trader. We're not really endorsing that, but I'm just curious how you even work with them. To me, that just seems like a silly endeavor to even engage in, frankly. But go ahead, talk to me a little bit about the intuition, because I agree intuition is really important, but, we're all about facts too. So tell me how that shows up. I'm not sure you were talking more cosmic and sort of, I'm just curious how that shows up a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of different forms of intelligence. There's the facts intelligence in this case with anything, looking at the facts, and that's our intellectual reasoning mind. But there's a lot more going on for us in terms of intelligence than just our cognitive ability to put together facts and statistics. And, and we all know this, right? So what does that really mean? Well, I'm going to try to explain it in the most logical way possible, because that's kind of what smart people need to get it. So fear. So let's say you're thinking of investing I'm a real estate investor, right? You're thinking of buying this property, this fourplex or something. And, you're looking at the numbers and you're looking at the neighborhood and you're looking at the price and you're doing all those calculations intellectually. But there's also a part of you that intuitively knows. Now, there's fear if you buy the thing. All it's going to involve, what could potentially happen, what's going to happen with the market. And let's say that fear is a level 8 out of 10. Pretty high fear if I buy this thing. And then there's also fear if you don't buy the thing, the missed opportunity, right? The regrets, that kind of thing. And let's say that fear is a level 5 out of 10. So it's a lower fear. So there's fear if you buy the thing and there's fear if you don't buy the thing.
Right.
And I used to think that the greater fear will trump the smaller fear. Like there's more fear to buy the thing, so you don't buy it, right? But there's also, it depends on how much of a risk take you are and what's the risk reward. Like this is all happening unconsciously. And so there's an 8 versus a 5. Am I in the mood for a risk? Am I bored? Like, do I want this project? Like there's fear of this taking a lot of time because I have to remodel it, or there's fear. Anyway, there's so much going on way too fast for our cognitive brain to make sense of.
Yes.
And all the net result is you just have a gut feeling that you shouldn't buy this place, or you should buy this place, depending on your mood.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, to make it more simple, let me put it into terms of skiing. There's fear if you ski the steep slope, say a level 8. So there's a lot of fear, right? It's freaking scary. And there's consequences, but there's also fear if you don't ski it, but it's a lesser fear. And all that is involved, like, what does that mean about me as a person if I don't ski this, right?
I have that. Yeah, I trained, or that's why I showed up. That's why I like, it's fun to have some of that. Why do you even participate in the sport? We don't want it to be like everything else in life. So I get it.
Here's the key. Here's the key, because I'm not done with this analogy yet. Here's the key in that moment. Always the question should be, am I in the mood for fear right now?
Right.
And if you are in the mood for fear, because the greater fear is to ski the slope, you ski the slope. But on a day that I ski 10 runs, I'm only going to be, I'm 57 years old now. Back in the day, I was always in the mood for fear. And then I would always ski the slope. But now I'm not always in the mood for fear. And I maybe will ski the slope 2 runs out of 10. And if I'm not in the mood for fear, then I'll choose the lesser fear and I won't ski it. And so this is all happening unconsciously. This is not a logical thing. This is what we mean by intuition. Like, I'm kind of feeling this run, like I want to do it. I'm kind of feeling like I don't want to do it. And so again, fear, and this is huge, fear does not stop anybody from doing anything. We get that wrong. It's our unwillingness to feel fear that stops us. But fear is the wisdom that helps us not make bad decisions. But the fear doesn't stop us from making the investment. It's just our advisor behind the scenes for us to tap into our intuition on whether to invest or not invest. And last thing I'll say, you have 2 primary wisdoms to decide whether to do something or not. There's your intellectual mind, and then there's this intuition I just described. And if you're only paying attention to one of them, your logic, for example, you are blind in one eye and you don't trust yourself because you have no depth perception. But if you have both eyes looking at it, then you have depth perception. Then you can make a wise choice.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm thinking about some of these examples I've seen, just some of the scarier things we've had at buying our first home, right? How, I just remember I had a client once tell me, we live in Southern California, Pasadena, bought his first home as a single person years back for $179,000. He said it had the worst buyer's remorse of his life for several weeks afterwards. Turns out that's well over $1 million. So sometimes you have to step into that fear. And intuitively, maybe but you can't really think that through to know what's going to happen. There's still so many other factors. You just have to move forward. Even it's the same person, but everybody I've worked with has bought Apple, way back when, or at any point when it went up and up. They've all just said the same thing. I wish I owned more. I wish I owned more. It's never easy to make those decisions. The easy money's been made. It's never easy money. There are always hard decisions going forward because there is that risk of loss, but you have to move forward. So just having seen those and through the intuition that you're talking about, some of these giant winners, I just look back and, even on real estate or things, somebody buys years ago. So somebody bought coastal real estate in Southern California, now it's a $4 million teardown. I mean, they weren't geniuses. They couldn't have thought. There's a big part of luck, right, to that, or the way the world worked out. but they intuited and they went forward with it. So I get what you're saying. And then I see folks that it's really interesting, having done this like 28 years now with second and third generation people. There are some people who really just have good intuition or who lean into it and kind of always make the right decisions and don't overthink it, but they sort of trust us in partnership to have a discussion about it a little bit or talk about it. But that's a great insight. So please keep going. I'm chatting a bunch here, but you're just making me think of a lot of things that come up in conversations and experiences we have with people.
Let me give an example of Elon Musk. I don't know the guy. I know his brother. I know his ex-wife. Anyway, he's obviously a big risk taker. He obviously is willing to feel fear. So that I've really been emphasizing a willingness to feel fear, but I haven't told you about the second part to being in flow with fear. So willingness to feel fear. Well, what do we do with the fear that we are now willing to feel? Because he's obviously taking big risks, a lot of fear in his life. The second secret to dangerous sports athletes that even dangerous sports athletes don't know about, I didn't know about during my ski career. It took me a really long time of studying Zen and I facilitate voice dialogue. So I facilitate conversations between clients and their fear. And I've done tens of thousands of these facilitated sessions. The second part is instead of being in resistance to that fear that we're now willing to feel, so that's a step in the right direction. We're no longer in resistance, we're willing to feel it. What we want to have is intimacy with that fear. And intimacy with fear is what took me into an altered state. We call it the zone or a flow state in the mountains that helped me be absolutely magnificent and made me look fearless and made me feel fearless. But I wasn't fearless. I was Batman and fear was Robin, and we were stronger together than apart. And fear kept me alive. It was motivating me because I wanted to feel it. I helped me make great decisions just intuitively in a moment's notice without thought. It made me powerful, like a person that lifts a car off of somebody's legs. That's the person plus fear, makes them super strong. It gives me clear vision. It makes my, like if you look at animals that are running for their lives, like they're hyper athletic, their vision is heightened. It expands who I am by being willing to feel fear. There's no learning or growth. It just is a very expansive emotion if you're willing to feel it. And if you have intimacy with it, then it takes you into a flow state, that intuitive, lightning fast flow state. So I believe that on some level, Elon Musk certainly is willing to feel fear. And he has a certain level of intimacy with fear that keeps him sharp. However, he has insomnia. He can't sleep without sleep meds. I don't know if that's still the case. It probably is, though. And so his undealt with fear that he's not having intimacy with during the day, like see fear as a person in our lives. Like, okay, let's play, but I'm not going to let you get the better of me. And he probably is really good at blocking that fear out and goes stoic in the face of it and becomes a narcissist and arrogant, like, tough, masculine man. Yeah. So no fear here, right? Well, that undealt with fear, that person that's been with him all day that he's been ignoring will not be denied. Fear has a very strong personality. It will do whatever it takes to make itself known if we ignore it. And so it wakes Elon Musk up in the middle of the night and just shows up in his brain, like it floods into his mind and just, because that's probably where he lives, and just shows up as monkey mind. He can't go back to sleep. So there are consequences. So there's perks that come from having a flowing, intimate relationship with fear, but there are consequences if you don't. One of those consequences are insomnia. Another consequence is an anxiety disorder or just anxiety in general, like fear that just is constantly there, like the inability to relax. That's fear just trying to get our attention, like pay attention to me. I will not be denied. It can show up as headaches or tight shoulders, or maybe if you have an old injury, maybe a strained back, it can stay lodged there. It'll go to whatever place it can best get your attention physically in order to make itself known. So if you have a fibromyalgia, I'm I would love somebody to do a test about repressed fear stuck in our bodies. It's like we kink the hose on it, and then it's just fear is stuck in our bodies and it recirculates round and round.
Yeah.
Could show up as anger issues, which is fear's fight energy. And it could show up as depression too. Like if we're really good at blocking out fear, if we're really good at blocking out anger, well, we have to feel something. So we feel sadness instead and on. So if we have any problem in our lives, not being in flow with fear, kinking the hose on it usually has something or everything to do with it. So not only is our relationship with fear the most, it's really important to be in flow with it in order to be successful in life, but it's really important so that we're mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally in flow with lives and just healthy. If you look at my spine x-rays or my knee x-rays, I mean, I should be in horrible pain, but as long as I'm in flow with my fear, I'm not. So as long as I'm in flow with my fear, I just went through a divorce, like I can sleep. So flow equals fear times intimacy, or whatever it is that we're feeling times intimacy. Just to conclude that, Dogen Zenji is a great Zen master that lived 900 years ago. I just named my cat Dogen 3 days ago, actually. That's just how much I love this quote. Okay. So Dogen Zenji said, enlightenment is intimacy with all things. But we don't use the word enlightenment anymore. It's obsolete. We use the word flow. So flow is intimacy with all things. If we can be in flow with our fear, if we can be in flow with the world around us, with another human being, with, our just intimacy, like you don't need fear to get into a flow state. Like you can just be in flow with the plants and when you're gardening, and that can take you into a flow state. But just having flow with everything, your decisions, your own mind, but in particular, your fear, if you can do that, then it's pretty easy to be in flow with everything.
That's wonderful. I mean, we try and deal very holistically with folks and clients. So there's, getting to the million or, some bigger, at some point you've won the game. What's the greater goal? Passing it along. Where's your happiness? You talk about flow and intimacy, and then people hearing this will know, even I thought of stuff. Oh, I tighten up here, or, we've had those nights where we can't sleep, or Elon Musk, he's brilliant on 3.5 to 4 hours sleep. What could he be doing off 7, But you must get a lot of folks who come to you with that. So we want to make that a resource with folks. But I don't think most people have this understanding, all these repressions. I've heard, like even cancers, they say are a lot of times 10 years in the making. It's just some repressed thing there's a manifestation, that later surfaces. So I think what you're saying is just healthy intimacy to let the pressure off the valve all the time so that you're in harmony and balance. It's kind of like your recovery. For an athlete, even myself, it's so much easier to just go and try and practice or get more laps in. But those days off are harder sometimes, right? Because you're just but it's so much healthier. It's just the way I think about it.
It's not so much about days off. It's just a matter of at some point you got to deal with your fear in a healthy way.
For sure.
And, maybe just telling a quick story of my life and coming into wealth, because I'm totally self-made. I, paid for my own college and you don't make a lot of money as a professional skier. I did quite well. I was making 6 figures in the 90s, but just barely. Skiing, big mountain extreme skiing doesn't pay well, but I was the best in the world. But what I did when I was 27 is I took all the money I was making as a skier and I started investing it in real estate. And fear is what made me invest it. I was like fear of, all of a sudden getting crippled and not having any way to make a living, fear of, future of being stuck, we're in the ski industry forever. I could dissect it. There's no need to, trying to think about all the reasons why I'm investing in the real estate market, and the relationship to fear. That could be interesting, but it really doesn't matter. But I just want to explain this as a way to help people understand the undercurrent of fear that's just there all the time, and to honor and respect that, because it's what makes us smart. So, I had all these fears that you could identify, but really it was just fear. I was just knew that intuitively I wanted to invest in real estate, that this was super important for my future. So, and I had no credit. So I seller financed a fourplex sight unseen. I was heli skiing in Alaska and my real estate agent found it for me. And I'm like, let's buy it, right? And I invested, which was a lot of money for me back then, $15,000 sight unseen on this property because I was more afraid of not buying it than of buying it. Spent my summer remodeling it. And I was afraid of, you could call it, but I didn't feel afraid. I was just like, didn't want to spend money on the remodel. So I would source new windows from a salvage yard, for example. I remodeled a fourplex top to bottom for $5,000 one summer.
Wow.
And I just brought my A game. I had a blast dancing with my fear in that way, not aware that it was there. And then I bought another property once that one was paid off. And then I had the income from that property to pay the mortgage on the other property. And I lived in the crummy basement apartment and rented out the upstairs for the price of the mortgage and lived for free. And then now I had the upstairs people and the fourplex paying off this mortgage. And then once that one was paid off, I bought another property and on. And with it all, fear was my companion, just keeping me motivated. And there's a saying in Zen, a good horse moves at even the crack of a whip. And there was just this whip cracking me, a fear of XYZ that's irrelevant. And I just kept doing it until I got to the point where I wasn't in the mood for fear anymore and I stopped investing. But by that point, I had done really well. And in all this, I started taking new risks with my career. Now, I challenge existing norms on what to do about anxiety disorders. I'm about to come out with a book that is the scariest thing I've ever done. You know, I'm taking on big pharma and existing norms on how to treat anxiety disorders, basically saying what we're doing isn't working. You know, here's what to do instead. Imagine, you know, swimming against the current like that. You know, what this, I've even had people ask me if I'm worried that big pharma may murder me. Like, this is like, this could happen. Like, and there's a lot of projection. And imagine somebody who's 75 years old that's taught overcoming fear their whole lives. And I come along saying, we don't want to do that. That's what causes anxiety disorders. It kinks the hose, fear gets stuck. You know, it's the biggest risk of my life. But the thing is, I wasn't in the mood for it until about 6 months ago. You know, so always it comes back to that question. Like, after my ski career ended, I did nothing for 10 years. All I did was sleep. I didn't invest. I just went to lunch with a friend. That was my day, because I had just had such just a buffet of fear for so long. And then I was like, okay, time to just not do the thing with fear anymore, have a break. So we come in waves. And always, though, our relationship with fear is being played out. And always it's important to notice what that relationship is with fear, because it pretty much shows us, back to what I keep saying, what our choices are and why, and it shapes our personality.
That is so great. I mean, that's great that you made those investments along the way. You know, you came from a time where there wasn't really a career for that, right? Like, I think of the X Games and things like that. I knew the guys growing up who invented the vertical skateboarding. I mean, they were like close to going to prison. They didn't realize they were creating the precursors for the X Games. Or even Tony Hawk. I've heard him interviewed where he bought some real estate, but, you know, spent most of his money, and he got a small pittance. He sold his first video game for $250,000 that he thought was like $1 million. And the next time it came around, he took a percentage of the video game, and just got an enormous amount. He learned the second time. But you just congratulations on your book too. It sounds, what an incredible, your preparation for this, to take on fear or be intimate with it, because it is a scary water to step into. And that those big interests may come after you or try and shut some stuff down. You don't know how that's going to go. But I think you're on the right path, and good for you for leaning into it. And I suspect a lot of the folks listening to this might think back now, you know what, I was what was my relationship with fear at going through these important milestones in my life? We don't really think about it, but it's there and they move through it. We're probably wiser, possibly better at it going forward. That would be the goal, right? To be better at it the next. So I've had things where I was just really scared and then the second time, well, sometimes then it's even harder to get up the second time, but other times you work through it. You don't want to. I just heard an incredible podcast. A guy was talking about, he was a writer for the New York Times. We'll start to wrap up in a second here. And at any rate, he, as a kid, as a 16-year-old, he got beat up in some fight or bullied or something like that. Then as an adult, he decided to go into the ring with Julio Cesar Chavez, who was the welterweight champion of the world, for one round. And just talking to his trainers who thought he was crazy, they were just trying to teach him how to avoid it so he wouldn't die in the ring. And this guy wanted to go after him like George Foreman. But it was all because he wanted to overcome this thing when he was 16 years old. And he ended up going the round and with this trainer, and he went a second round. And Julio Cesar Chavez, he said he hit him so hard one time, he just felt like the most powerful Hoover vacuum cleaner in the world. It sucked all the air out. But he worked and he went a second round, and Julio Cesar took it a little bit easy on him because he wasn't a professional. But the things that this guy would do to get into a ring like that untrained or with very limited training versus the top guy in the world, that was just a crazy experience. I really, we were on a long drive, so I got to hear this discussion. Do you want to talk as we start to kind of wrap up, because this is just fascinating, honestly, and hearing all your stories about the real estate. So you're not like this overnight success. It took a long time. A lot of these, rebuilding the duplex, for $5,000, a lot that resonates with a lot of the things that are, my clients or people we serve work with. Do you want to kind of wrap up and talk about your services, your book, how people reach you, messages you really want to share, how they can get in touch? Go ahead and share all that. We'll have extensive show notes as well. But this is amazing, Kristen. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me just talk about your friend that you were in the car with. My guess is that he said no to fear on the schoolyard. And he's like, I can do better than that. And I'm going to go all the way saying yes to fear in this other way. And so the takeaway can also be conquering and overcoming fear suggests a war. We do not want to pick a war with fear. That we will have so many problems in our lives if we do that. Yep. And even though that's what's taught, and we almost can't help ourselves talking about fear in a combative way like that, because that's our society's norm. So what I'm trying to do is change that to speak about fear in an inclusive way. So I already have one book out that I really recommend, The Art of Fear: Why Conquering Fear Won't Work and What to Do Instead, ironically. That's why I'm like, ooh, there's that word conquering. So it's in my book title. So that's the book that I have out right now. It's a great book. I have a TED Talk out. If you go to my website, KristenUlmer.com, I have a free fear and anxiety assessment, which is a series of 20 really interesting questions that we can ask ourselves to determine our relationship with fear. Do we have a healthy relationship with fear or not? And then based on your answers, you'll get next step advice on what to do. And the advice kind of does boil down to start speaking about fear in a positive way. That's where we have to start to turn this around and have fear work for us instead of against us. And fear actually doesn't work against us. We sabotage ourselves for having a compromised relationship with fear. So we can even waste years of our lives just shopping or being in our head so much or avoiding things just because that's how we deal with fear, or obsessively cleaning the house or eating a lot of food. Eating food is not a sign of repressing fear, but eating a lot of food, it probably is. So just getting to know our relationship with fear is actually the first part. Speaking about it in an inclusive way, shifting from dealing with our fear intellectually to dealing with our fear emotionally, which is basically learning how to feel it. If we learn how to feel it, eventually that leads to intimacy with it. These are the things that we can do to have the healthiest possible relationship with fear. And I'm here to help anybody do that. I offer workshops, ski camps, one-on-ones, you name it. And then also that free fear and anxiety assessment, the book, and the TED Talk.
That's amazing. We'll link to all this in the show notes, but that's such a wonderful invitation for anyone that this calls out to. you can start to work on this. I would think you're not going to solve it overnight, but it's probably a process, but you have a framework for that, right? And you've seen it show up in so many ways, and who isn't dealing with it in some respect. So that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I think this is such a giant gift. I would love to have you back again sometime to go deeper on this, but we'll leave it at this for today. We're going to link to all that. Patrice is on the line. She's my co-host. Do you have any questions, Patrice? Because it's pretty fascinating area.
Robert, I had so many questions. However, we are up against the clock, so you've got to get Kristen back. I want to ask about things like, well, does fear give us a reason?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so hold that thought. That's going to be number 2, Robert, right there.
Okay.
I love it.
So you've queued up number 2. Okay.
We're not going to Such a good question.
That's why I wanted Patrice to ask some of these questions. I knew she'd have some real good ones. So,
we are up against the clock right now. So, Robert, why don't we wrap this one up? But Kristen, you've got to come back. You've definitely got to come back.
I would die and go to heaven. All I want to do is talk and think about fear all the time and feel it.
Wow. We'll have you back. And I'll think about this some more. Super appreciate it. We're going to link to all this. If anybody is struggling with any of these or something comes up down the road, you have this expert right here you can reach out to. I encourage you to do it. She's fantastic. You can get her experience and start to work on these things. Who doesn't have them? So thank you so much, Kristen. We really appreciate it. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Millionaire Next Door podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. Signature Estate and Investment Advisors, LLC, SEIA, is an SEC registered investment advisor. However, such registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and no inference to the contrary should be made. Securities offered through Signature Estate Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SEIA LLC, 2121 Avenue of the Stars, Suite 1600, Los Angeles, California, 90067. Telephone number 310-712-2323.